A common problem that I see all the time in young dubstep producers is that a lot of them struggle with making good drums. Especially when I critique other people's tracks, I would hear many drum loops that sound like this. That loop is just really bland, and it's a boring loop with only a few elements. It doesn't sound full at all, but today I'm going to show you how to make this drum loop. Alright, to start off, the basics of any dubstep drum loop is just going to be a kick snare pattern. Mine sounds like this. That's my kick and my snare. And what I do is I put them in each individual patterns. These are two separate patterns, right? And I color them so I can just see them a little better. But what I'm doing is in the kick pattern, I have my kick drum getting triggered. And I also have this sidechain getting triggered. And this is just a little sidechain envelope. All you have to put down is one dot because I custom made the envelope in the track right here. You see, I created this little sidechain envelope, and I can edit that if I want to edit the sidechain, but that's the general, envelope that will happen every time that the sidechain hits. So I have the sidechain hitting just one shot on the kick, and I also have it one shot on the snare as well. So every time the kick and the snare hit, the sidechain is going to go right with it. It works beautifully. As far as post-processing for the kick and the snare, what I usually see in a lot of producers is they'll just take the kick and the snare, and the kick and the snare will be good samples. They'll just throw them in there and not do anything with it. They won't, add any effects or EQing or whatever. They just leave it there. And sometimes that can work, but I find that this strategy works very, very well to make your drums really punchy. What I do is to start off, I just EQ it. This is the kick drum. I just had some frequencies that I thought were kind of powerful, especially in the low end. The low end was pretty thick, and you want to make sure that the low end is good and punchy, but it's not too large because it'll interfere with the sub. So this is what it sounds like EQ'd. And then what I do here, I don't compress it. I actually use a wave shaper, which is a distortion module. And I just make one dot and bring it up to about here. Because if you look at the graph right here, you can see that line is where the kick is peaking right there. So I just brought this dot, I just made a dot, normally it's like this, and I bring it up to about here. And I think it sounds really, really good when it's just after this little line. And exact same concept for the snare. I just EQ it a little bit. I high passed it, added a little low end and a little very high end. And then I do the exact same thing with the wave shaper. I brought it up to about the same spot, about here. There we are, and I think that sounds pretty dang good. Another good thing about using the wave shaper is that instead of using Maximus or other kinds of compression, you will not get latency. At least you will have very, very, very little latency. I remember I used to do really complex compression with my drums in the project, and there was a lot of latency. I'd have like 2 or 3 milliseconds of latency with the drums, and you really don't want that at all. Step 2 is the cymbals. The cymbals themselves sound just like this. I personally like to have all of my cymbals in one pattern in FPC. Now all I did was open up a blank FPC and I threw in the samples that I like best. You can use any samples here. I just threw in ones from different libraries that I had on my computer and they ended up sounding pretty good. But I'm going to go over the basic pattern here. Now to start out, I have 3 crash cymbals. Now what I'm doing with this is this crash cymbal right here is happening on the kick, which is happening every beat. And the first one in this back beat right here, I brought the velocity all the way up because that is the beginning of the bar, and having a bigger crash in the beginning is always a good thing to do. It'll just add more power to that very first hit. And I have this cymbal right here playing on every snare. You see it goes kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. Now, I know there are some kicks and some snares not in the, normal, it's not in the normal pattern. It goes, but with that second kick in there, that kind of fill kick happens about here, I believe. Happens right about here. Yeah, I have this cymbal right here playing on that fill kick. Now I basically use this cymbal right here for any kick and snare that I think is happening too quickly after another one, because I don't want to hit the exact same cymbal sample. I don't want to hit it too fast, I want to hit a different one in between for variation. So that's what this is. You can hear when the kick and the snare are also playing. Next up is very, very simple. It's just a ride cymbal. And I have this going at every beat for the entire 8 bars. That's pretty straightforward. I just brought the velocity down a little bit. I didn't want it quite as loud as the rest. The ride cymbal is pretty background. So that's nothing complicated. And finally, the hi-hats. Now, it may be a little hard to see the hi-hats that are scattered in here, but I'll highlight them for you. These are hi-hats. These are hi-hats, and this is an open hi-hat. So now you can kind of see the pattern. I have this hi-hat right here, this little shaker happening on every 4th bar, because I really like the way it adds to the dynamics of like the kick and stuff like that. I think it just pairs really nicely, so that's a good constant down there. And this is just the same pattern. This one beat right here is just the same pattern for the entire 8 bars. So if I zoom in, you can kind of see the pattern there. It does this hat, then this hat, then the open hi-hat, and then this hat. So it's constant this hat, this hat, this hat, this hat, and these two are just switching off in between beats. On its own, the hat pattern would sound like this. Now, as far as the post-processing of these cymbals, it is very, very simple. What I have here is the first hi-hat, and I just panned it a little to the left, and I'm going to pair that with a panned to the right hi-hat later. But all I'm doing is just throwing a high pass on it. And then for the next one, it's panned right in the center. That's that shaker. Again, just a high pass. And then for this one right here, it's the same thing over here, except I just panned it to the right. And I just throw a high pass. And for this one, this is the open hi-hat. Again, it's just a high pass and a little bit of EQing. There's nothing really I'm doing crazy with any of these, really. And then I have the ride. High pass, a little bit of EQing there. And as you can see, it's a little lower than the other hi-hats. It's just a little more background. Then I have the cymbals. High pass there. High pass there. You got to be careful with the cymbals though, because you don't want to take away too much in this range. This is where that's where the body of the cymbal lies. And even if you can't see much frequency action there is frequency action, and it's going to make the cymbal sound a lot more full. So just be careful where you make the cut here. And that's the same for the other one as well. Now all of these cymbals right here are routed into this cymbals bus, and what I'm doing here is I just have a final high pass. I just like to do that. I don't know, always high pass it, and then I'm just doing slight bits of EQing in the harsh region. There's nothing too crazy, and then I have this little bit of reverb. If I turn the dry all the way down, this is what it sounds like. You can use any reverb for this. I just wanted a little bit of room noise, a little bit of ambience. I gave it some stereo width, cut the lows, boosted the highs and the damp and such, just really basic reverb stuff. And it just adds a lot of really nice background to the cymbals. It makes it sound very full. And then finally, I just threw a little bit of sound goodizer on it. I know this is, kind of a cheap move, but if you just take a really basic compressor, especially with sound goodizer, it just really brightens things up and makes it very powerful. You can hear when I turn it off. It's subtle, but I think it adds more power to the drum loop, and the compression just brings everything together. And when you run the cymbals through the sidechain channel, you get a very nice drum loop. Now there are a couple of extra things here that you probably noticed. I'm going to go over those. This is a little reverse. It sounds like this on its own. And this is just a really small little impact sample that is reversed to do that little sweep up. And I love to do it right before the snare. Now you don't want to overuse this. Like, you don't want this to happen on every snare. Otherwise the effect will get very old and it won't be as interesting anymore. See, that just sounds kind of bland again. There's too much repetition. I just like it on this last little bit right here. And I also have a tom. Now this is not anything complicated at all. This is just something that you can add. Not many producers add this, and if they do, they put it in the very background. However, toms, especially as, you know, just little fills at the end, can add a lot of dynamic to the structure, you know. No complex processing needs to go in either of those. You should just really make sure that neither of them are louder than the kick and the snare themselves. They need to be lower. They're just kind of reinforcing the loop from the back, you know. So to recap, the elements that we have are the kick and the snare. We have the hi-hats. We have the ride cymbal. We have the crash cymbals. And finally, we have the reverse and the tom. There you have it. That is how I make my dubstep drums. If you have any questions about this, or if you have any tips and tricks for how, you know, you do your drum loops, any suggestions on that, I'd love to hear your opinion down in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Happy producing.